a Facebook, which means I'm going to start my watch party because more people follow me personally than do the American Soundbite page. So if you have not yet followed the American Soundbite, click on the little search button, type in the American Soundbite, and follow it. That way you get notified every time we not just go live, but post some really important, vital, critical content to, well, your day. Okay, so my watch party is starting. Oh, my watch party started that quick. It's a little delayed, which is, well, I guess I just have to get used to that delay. It's as if we're like truly a professional broadcasting studio. Well, because you know how professional I am all the time. So since everything's running, we are going to go live with the podcast. You are listening to the American Soundbite, a podcast that features common sense thoughts of an everyday American. This is the start of the most valuable 10 minutes of your day, so congratulations on joining us a little late on a Monday morning. I am certainly glad that you're here. Hey, before we start, I'd like to ask you personally to let your friends, your family members, even your coworkers that follow you on social media, let them know that you start your day by listening to the American Soundbite, and well, they would be a better person if they did as well. The recommendation from you to them, well, it truly will give them more things to talk about, more things to think about, and will just make them a better person to be around when you're standing around the coffee pot or the water cooler. And it will make them more conversive and, well, just better at what they do. We're in the midst of a presidential election. I'm not sure if you knew that, because by watching the news and the media and, well, the lack of presence of candidates and ads and everything else, while I'm not complaining about that whatsoever, but it may be surprising that we're like 120 days or something away from a presidential election. And that brings up a question. And the question, quite simply, is this: who has the most power from a political sense in America today? Or more importantly, who should have the most power in our government, government overall, today or always? I think today you could argue that the most powerful person politically in America is the president. After all, we only have one of those, and he gets to live in the White House, and his office is in the Oval Office, and he gets to sign all of the bills into law or not. So you could argue that, well, therefore, the president is the most powerful person politically in America. Maybe you think the Speaker of the House is the most powerful person politically in America. Certainly the Speaker of the House makes more money than, well, most people politically, because they wield all kinds of power and they have the highest probably susceptibility to corruption of any politician in America. It's certainly not our governors, although our governors on a wide scale this year have exerted quite a bit of power and influence when they made decisions to violate the Constitution, to protect all of our citizens. Whether they had the legal right or bias to do that or not, they chose to do it. And so amongst all of that, the question is, who is it that has the power? Well, I think I would agree that today, in our government today, the president wields maybe a little bit, possibly a lot more power than anybody else. Congressmen serve a 2-year term, and they run every 2 years. They spend, maybe tens of thousands of dollars on their election. Presidents, the parties overall, the campaigns are spending, like, I think the last election was $1 billion that both Hillary Clinton and I think President Trump spent close to that in running for office. So from a financial standpoint, you could certainly say that it was the president. But who should have the power? If you read the Constitution, and I mean, if you read the Constitution, not someone's interpretation of the Constitution, not the Constitution as it's applied in our country today, but if you read the Constitution, including the Bill of Rights, you'll see that very specifically, the Constitution itself limits the power of the federal government. It limits the ability of the federal government to, govern, to rule, to control the people and the states. It limits the activities, the ability of the federal government in what they can and cannot do. Now, I will tell you that the federal government, that Congress and the presidency has way overstepped those limits, those controls that have been put in place by the Constitution. But the Constitution specifically limits what they can and can't do. Or it specifically says that if it's not specifically granted to them, if the powers aren't granted to them in the words of the Constitution, or if it's not specifically prohibited, then they can't do it. So basically, if it doesn't say they can do it, then they're not allowed to do it. If you read the Constitution, it in fact gives much more power to the people, to you and me, and to our states, to our state governments, because we live in a federalist society, which means that while there is a level of control at the federal level, the majority of the responsibility to govern, to rule, is at the state level, which means our governors are the ones who are supposed to have the most power. I don't know if that's necessarily good or bad, but if you think about it for a minute, as Americans, we have much more ability to hold our governors to account than we do the president. Our governors are responsible for a smaller number of us, for a more localized population within the state. And, our governor is more closely scrutinized by the state legislatures and has, some responsibility to report at some level to the federal government. And more specifically, the governors have to, be held accountable by us. We could see, just here this year in the state of Ohio, and I'm sure in every other state where governors did this, when the governor first said, hey, we got to shut down the state because, we got this bug and my job is to protect you, but we only need to do it for 14 days. At first, we gave them some latitude. Oh, okay, 14 days. I may not agree with it, but 14 days, yeah, we can do that. And then 14 days turned into 30 days, and 30 days turned into 60 days, and then 90 days. And, some people at government, there's still businesses that aren't allowed to be opened yet. But if you look at the state of Ohio, you look at Governor DeWine and everything that he's done, he has backpedaled each time when he's been pressured. There was a group of fitness centers, of gyms, that filed a lawsuit against him saying it's not constitutional for you to keep us closed. The day they filed suit, he said, oh, gyms are going to be able to open. Here's the date, and here's what they have to do. Hair salons did the same thing. Just recently, the theme parks, Cedar Fair, Cedar Point, and Kings Island, and others joined in a lawsuit doing the same thing. It's unconstitutional for you to force us to be closed. And each time on the day they filed the lawsuit, the governor, oh, hey, we've got a plan. Yeah, we had this in the works. He's afraid to go to court because he knows that while his order will not be upheld, his control, his power will be overruled in court. And so he caves. So that demonstrates that very quickly the American people, that the citizens of each state have more power over the governor than we do of, say, the president specifically. And that's the way that it should be. Because if we can't overrule a governor, if we can't force a governor to do something as a populace, we have the ability to leave one state and move elsewhere. We have the ability to control how governors govern by where we live. If a governor's doing a horrible job and isn't responsive to the populace, and the populace leaves, the tax revenue drops, the businesses all take off, then real quickly that's going to affect change. At the federal level, if we move from Ohio to Indiana or down to Florida, it doesn't matter. We're still in America. But if Ohio loses all of its business, real quickly, the legislature is going to wake up and say, hey, governor, you got to change your policies. And they start submitting bills and forcing change in the state. So if you read the Constitution, our governors are supposed to have much more power than anyone at the federal government. And it's because we, the constituents, the citizens of the United States, we have much more power, much more ability to control how our states are governed than we do the federal government. Remember, the founders of our country had great disdain. They hated the concept of government because they knew that every government, given time and, well, left to its own vices, every government in history becomes corrupt, abuses its authority, absorbs power, and, well, ends up, well, killing itself. And they didn't want that to happen. So they put controls in place in the Constitution to make sure that the federal government didn't have the access to the power, that the people retained the power. Now, again, the federal government has abused that, has ignored the Constitution, and has taken power from the states and from you and I, and has run with that. It's unconstitutional. It's illegal. It shouldn't be allowed. We should be stopping it at all costs, but we haven't to this point. But the Constitution does specifically prevent it. We should wake up. We should take that power back. We should let our governors have much more power than we let the federal government have. And we should understand that it's not the government's responsibility to take care of us. It's not the government's responsibility to protect us from ourselves. It's not the government's responsibility to, well, I've already said take care of us, but in general to mandate or to dictate how society should be run. If those things need to be done, they should be done at the state level. And in reality, they shouldn't be done. In America, we should have our freedom. We should have our liberty. We should be allowed to choose how we want to live. And we shouldn't turn to government to help us or to give us answers or to give us guidance. The government should be there specifically to protect our freedoms, to protect our liberties, and to give us the right to choose how we want to live. The more we turn to government, the more we expect government to protect us or save us or provide us a safety net in certain situations. the less of that liberty we have, the less freedom that we have. And that's a dangerous thing to allow. We've relied on government far too much through my generation. And that reliance on government has gotten us into the situations that we're in today. It's time that we take that power back. It's time that we demand the federal government follow the Constitution, that powers that are necessary be given to our state legislatures, to our governors. But in reality, that we understand that our freedom and our liberty is what's of most importance. It's what's critical in our society today. And we need to realize that we need to rely on ourselves. If we need something, we shouldn't ask government for it. We should work hard for it. We should rely on our neighbors and the generosity of those around us, which actually requires us, by the way, to be generous to our neighbors and to those around us, as opposed to relying on government to give us or do things for us. The more we rely on government, the more we give up our freedom. Whether we want to or we realize it or not, that's what happens. And the way that we stop it is we make sure that the government is constrained by the way that the Constitution specifically constrains it. And we have a much stronger ability to control our state governments. So while our governments should have the power, today that power rests in Washington, D.C. It's unconstitutional, it's unethical, and it's definitely illegal if you understand that the Constitution is the law of the land. We need to change that. How do you change it? Well, we've got to get professional politicians out of the picture. All those people that call themselves Republicans and Democrats, all those people who have served in government for years or made a career out of it, need to be gone, because this government is supposed to be by the people, of the people, and for the people. And as long as we have professional politicians in office, it's not run by the people. It's not a government of the people. It's a government of professional politicians who are controlled by huge not multinational, but huge, powerful corporations, the political parties. And we need the people to take over the government. And the way we do that is we vote non-politicians into office. Every seat of the House should be filled by somebody who has never been in politics before. And by the way, should be filled by somebody who doesn't want to make politics their career. They're willing to do it for 2 years to serve you, the people. And when they're done, they come back to society and they live amongst, well, you, the people. And that's the way that it was supposed to be. That's the way that it should be. That's the way that you and I can make it. And that's how we affect change. That's how we give power back to the Constitution, which in essence is taking power back by us, by we, the people, who, well, the Constitution gave it to begin with. So that's something worth talking about. It's definitely something worth thinking about when you're a little tired after lunch today. And it's something worth fighting for. Remember that on November 3rd, and talk about it between now and then quite a bit. You have been listening to the American Soundbite. This is a podcast that features common sense thoughts of this everyday American. The last 17 minutes have been the most valuable 10 minutes of your day. And I really appreciate you joining us here for the podcast today. Hey, before you go, if you like the content, if you like the format of the show, click that like button. That lets me know that you like it, what we're doing, and you want us to keep following the same path. If you have any thoughts, any concerns, or any complaints about the material or about the show itself, type those into whatever app it is that you're using. Let me know. I'll read them, and it will affect change. While you're at it, that share button that's right next to the like button, let your friends, your family, your coworkers on social media know that you listen to the American Soundbite and that they really need to as well. Thanks a lot for listening. I hope you have a great day, and God bless. Alrighty, and that is a wrap. Yes, we went a little bit long today, but we started a little bit late, and so that makes up for it, or something like that. I am going to actually be out of town for a few days, and so I'm working on a format on how we can continue to deliver these messages. But no matter what, you will always be able to hear a daily updated episode on, well, the Spreaker podcast app, or Apple Podcasts, or wherever it is that you happen to download your podcasts. You'll be able to hear what it is that we have to share each and every day if you just search for the American Soundbite in your favorite podcast app. Thanks a lot for listening. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at our regularly scheduled